Grace to you all this morning and peace from God our Father and from our Lord and Savior, Jesus the Christ. Amen. As I was listening to Marianne reading the passage from Ecclesiastes, you take the whole bag with you, Laura. As I was listening to Marianne read the passage from Ecclesiastes, I was anxious to hear your response to that reading because it's fairly challenging, isn't it? Vanity of vanities, all is vanity, and what exactly does that mean? And then when Marianne finished, she said, as is our habit, the word of the Lord, and you all said, thanks be to God, which often happens, which makes me think that we maybe need to bring more of our consciousness to our time of worship, because what was there in that passage for us to be thankful for? The king, perhaps it was Solomon who wrote this particular passage in Ecclesiastes, is having a difficult time. It's one of those moments when he's looking back at everything that he has accomplished and wondering what difference it makes, what it amounts to, how it might be helpful or lasting. And he realizes, interestingly, if it was Solomon, he realizes that everything he's accomplished is going to be left to those who come after him, and he'll have no control over what they do with all that he has built up and gathered and tried to accomplish, tried to save for future generations. Our best efforts, Solomon seems to be saying in these words, are only good for one generation. And then who knows what the next generation will do with all that the previous generation has worked for. And in Solomon's case, according to what we understand from history, is that his son decided that he was going to take a different course of behavior than his father did. He was going to lock down on those rebellious countries, and within one generation, Israel had split into two nations. And so it was a good question that Solomon was asking, and maybe he saw the writing on the wall that things were not going to work out so well. And so Solomon's assessment of all of life, all that he tried to do, is vanity of vanities. Or another translation, futility of futilities. A big waste of time is what Solomon says about all of his effort and all of his focus, and not taking more time to enjoy himself, but trying to build up a financial reserve and build up a good nation and do all these things that would benefit future generations. When he takes a moment there and he looks back on all of it, he says, what a big waste of time. It's like chasing after the wind. You never succeed. You never catch that which you're chasing. Pretty depressing, huh? Yeah, thanks be to God, right? Except we notice at certain points in our own lives, I'm sure, the truth and the depth of what Solomon says. What's the point? It's a good question that we all need to ask ourselves from time to time, lest we just kind of put our heads down and move on forward to the best of our ability without ever stopping to take assessment of our life, its value, what our contributions are, what has meaning and purpose. I thought it was kind of funny. This is an indication to me of two important truths. A, God is always paying attention. And B, God has a very, very deep and sometimes sarcastic sense of humor. My colleague, Pastor Paul Johnson, who is the pastor of St. Andrew's Lutheran Church in Yorktown, is retiring. Today, as we gather here at Emmanuel of Pleasantville, Pastor Johnson is preaching to the congregation up at St. Andrew's in Yorktown his final sermon as their called pastor, as an ordained pastor in the Lutheran Church, until he moves now to retirement and will fill in now and then, but he will no longer have a regular call. I considered all my toil under the sun, he told me recently when I saw him, and it was a waste of time. What a great retirement topic, he said, to preach on for people at St. Andrew's. And as I stop and look back over my career as an ordained pastor, what have I accomplished? Vanity of vanity, futility of futilities. It's all a waste of time. God has a great sense of humor. And hopefully, you're able to laugh at that most of the time. It is in reflection on these words of Solomon that we then have those words of Jesus in this morning's gospel reading, but perhaps at first they don't quite seem to go together. Let's take a look at this landowner for a moment. This person with some means, some wealth, some ability. What does he do? Well, he gets fortunate because his stocks double. Anybody have a Nintendo stock? I heard that Nintendo stock has doubled since the release of Pokemon Go. Because now there's great popularity with Pokemon Go. And I'm proud to share with you that we are a Pokemon stop here at Emmanuel. Isn't that good to know? How many of you have no idea what the heck I'm talking about? Right, exactly. I hear you. I'm fortunate to have a son who plays, and so I know a little bit of what I'm talking about. So let's say that this landowner, this man had Nintendo stock which doubled in value, and all of a sudden he had this great windfall. What should he do with it? Well, he does what most of us would probably do with it. He plans for the future. I was fortunate enough to have this great blessing, this great windfall. I'm going to make appropriate plans because it may or may not come again, so I'm going to take advantage of it now. I'm going to get in touch with somebody who knows about finances, who can help me plan for the future, and I'm going to maybe put some of it into an IRA. I'm going to put some of it into some long-term investments that'll pay me a dividend, because the wisdom is that the stock market always goes up in the long run, and I'm just going to secure my future. That's kind of what this man says to himself. I'm going to take down the small barns, put up the big barns, and everything's going to be great. So it sounds like what he's doing is using sound planning, sound financial policy to help secure his future. And yet Jesus doesn't exactly hold this man up as a model of how we're supposed to live our lives and of what we're supposed to do, which may be a little bit of a disconnect for us. He's doing what most of us would do. What's wrong with that? Because obviously this man has not discovered yet in his life, although he's about to that very night, the truth of what Solomon says is that ultimately all that we work for, all that we strive for, is an engagement in futility. It's all about me. Vanity. Vanity. And if you read through the words of that rich man a second time, you'll notice perhaps how many times he uses the first person pronoun. I and my. I will do this. I will build new barns. I will say to my soul, soul, we have enough for the rest of our lives. It's all this internal dialogue that goes on between that man and himself about what he will do with what he now has so that he can secure his own future. And there's no extension of that goodness or graciousness that goes beyond himself. It's all about, I'm finally okay, I'm going to take care of myself, I can just eat, drink, relax, and be merry. Hence the saying that many of us know, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. I'm all set, thought the rich man, until he wasn't. Until that night God said, today, tonight, your soul is required of you. All that you've worked for, whose will it be? Now I feel like as the preacher this morning, I kind of have to draw a balance here for you. What Jesus is saying, what Solomon reflects upon, is not to say that we should be careless or that we shouldn't have a will. Can we just say that clearly and then put that aside? That's not at all the focus or the meaning of these words. Let me rather share with you my understanding of what the meaning and the purpose is, and then maybe you have some thoughts of your own that you would like to throw into the conversation. What about your life is most important? What about your life is most important? Is it the size of your bank account? Is it the amount of property that you own? How many houses or how many acres? Is it the size of your investments? If you were to meet somebody for the first time and they were to say to you, look, I've only got 5 minutes, tell me a little bit about yourself, Would you pull out your portfolio or share with them the total amount in your IRA? Or tell them you have a house in Pleasantville and another one up at the Cape and another one out in Arizona? Would those be the first things that you would share in those 5 minutes? Probably not. If those are the first things that you would share with them, we definitely need to have a conversation together. Because what God invites us into and what we ourselves as created human beings count most important in our lives are those relationships that help us to know who we are and what value we have. Those are the things that matter. And if you had 5 minutes to describe to somebody what was important about you, I doubt that finances would ever even get on the list. So the question becomes, in relationship to that reality, that what's most important to us are our relationships, our values, those things that are most meaningful, give ourselves a sense of purpose and worth in our lives. If that's true, then do something else. Take a look at how much time you spend on those various concerns of your life. How much time do you spend thinking about your finances, making a budget, following your portfolio, worrying about how you're going to pay the property taxes? How much time do you spend on those concerns? And not just time, but energy and focus. And how much time do you spend cultivating those relationships? Even though it always has to be you that makes that phone call to that friend that says, let's go for lunch, or let's go fishing this weekend. Even though if you didn't do it, you don't know that they would, it's still important enough for you to just go ahead and do that, to nurture and sustain that relationship. So how much time then in balance do you spend strengthening relationships, living out your values, and how much time do you spend worrying about money? The number one topic that Jesus preached about more than anything else was money. And this was 2,000 years ago, when most of the people didn't have as much as they do now. And yet he knew that money could be the greatest obstacle to a person living a fulfilled life, because they're so concerned about having enough and how to get more. It's a seductive part of our nature. Money becomes so important and so involved in our thinking and our behavior. But it's the relationships, it's the values, it's that sense of who we are in the eyes of God that really makes the most difference to our sense of identity. And that's what Solomon was reflecting on. When he's all done with his life, when he has to take a look at what he's accomplished, what difference does it make? A lawyer will open up the will, have it read. Some descendants will receive some money. There may be some gratitude for that, there may not. But the money not earned will most likely be squandered pretty quickly because it doesn't have the same value. But those relationships, those people in your life, who even though no longer physically present still have meaning for you, that's not a waste of time. You still carry them in your hearts and minds. They still give your lives meaning and purpose and a sense of groundedness. They're important to you, even though they're no longer here. Is life really a waste of time? Well, I think the point that Jesus wants to make is not if it's directed towards others. That what really matters in our lives, and you all know this, but it's too easy to give into the message of the world that says that your value is measured in dollars. But you all know that the real purpose of your life, the real value in your life, are those relationships that you have formed, that you keep sustaining, and that will give you a sense of meaning and connectedness. Not least of all, sisters and brothers, that relationship with God. Perhaps most importantly is that relationship with God, that if you were then to measure that, so now let's try and balance those three balls: our financial concerns, our relationships with others, and then our relationship with God. Given that that's our most important relationship, how much time and energy and focus do we put into that? And if it looks like it's not coming out exactly balanced, exactly well, how then do we strengthen our time and investment in that relationship so that it gives our lives the meaning and purpose that we seek? So that we, like Solomon, don't have to get to the end of our life and go, what a waste of time. It was all futility. This is where those words that Marianne shared with us from Colossians come in. The writer of Colossians says, I know what really matters. I know what counts. In fact, we get a sense, if we read those words again, that the author has already faced their dark night of the soul and has found light at the other end, has found a sense of liberation and freedom. Because that old self, says the writer of Colossians, no longer matters. That self that looked back at life and considered it futility and a waste of time no longer counts. I am a new creation because of what God has done for me in and through Jesus the Christ. I am already that new person. And so he says, put away all the marks and habits and behaviors of the old person. That's not you anymore. The new you, whom God has created, is alive. Respond to that new you. Let that new you have expression in the way you live, in the way you behave, in the way you speak, in the way you enjoy life. And by allowing that new, that resurrected, that loved you to assert itself, to share itself, to live, then, interestingly, those words of the rich man find their fulfillment. Eat the gifts that God has given you. Drink. Be merry. Be strong. Be confident. Be hopeful. Be faithful. Because God gives you those things. God continues to bless God's people. And as we share those blessings, we find our lives are not futile, are not vain, but have meaning and purpose and worth. Amen.